Hello there and welcome to episode 2 of my playthrough of the 2018 Harebrained Schemes BattleTech game. This will be the second part of a 3-part tutorial on this game before I get into the gameplay proper and the priority missions. For now though, or for this episode, I'm going to be taking you into the Mechbay and discussing all the little nuances and intricacies that you need to know to get success in this game. And it really is very important, if you want to succeed, to understand these mechanics. Things like how usable tonnage works on a mech and how some mechs are better than others. So, without further ado, let's just go into the Mechbay.
Welcome to the grease pit, Commander.
And that's our chief mech tech, young Vitanen there. I believe he's a Capellan, so he had a bad injury at one point. I think he said that he got, I think from memory anyway, he got injured when he was in the rumble seat of a mech somewhere. So has some pretty horrifying injuries, but he's a very good mech tech and usually very quick and reliable. So here are our mechs. Now the first point to note here is that we have 6 slots, which is termed Bay 1. There are 2 other bays here, Bay 2 and Bay 3. We do get access to those when we get the Argo, which is the big Lost Tech ship, but for now we're on the Leopard, so we are only able to keep a maximum of 6 mechs. We can keep mechs in cold storage, then they don't count to this number. If you do that, it strips all the weaponry off them, just puts them into a cold storage. You can see here there are 4 mechs on the books. We've got a Shadowhawk. The number here, its designation, is basically what kind of model it is. And some mechs have like different weapon loadouts, or basically just different levels of awesomeness depending on their like stock variant. So this is the Shadowhawk 2H. In this particular game, there's another variant of a Shadowhawk, which is a 2D. I actually prefer that variant, but the 2H is fine. That's very good for this stage in the game. We've got a Vindicator, the VND-1R. There is another mech, another Vindicator in this game. I think it's the 1AA. I actually prefer that one as well, but this, again, for this point in the game, this Vindicator is very good. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the Vindicator is the best medium mech in this game. And maybe in BattleTech. It's one of those like supremely amazing Capellan mechs. Capellans, you might not like them, they might be evil space communists, but my goodness, they can make a good mech. Next up, we've got the our stock, completely general usage mech, which is the BJ1, the Blackjack. The Blackjack is like the everyman mech in BattleTech. It's the mech that if you had like a local defense force, it's probably what they'd be using. It's completely fine. It's got decent ballistics, got decent energy hardpoints as well. It can take a punch. It's got jump jets. It's quite manoeuvrable. Not very quick. It's quite slow for a 45-ton mech, but does a job basically. And then finally, I've got an urban mech, which is the UM-R60. The urban mech is... look how small he is. These are like, weirdly enough, in terms of like BattleTech culture, there are certain mechs that just like reach beyond the franchise. One of them is like the Mad Cat. Mad Cat's not in this game. It's a clan mech, so it appears in the BattleTech universe in 3050. But it's an amazing mech. It's a 75-ton, they're incredible, the Mad Cats. Brilliant, weapons of war. Completely versatile as well. What we call Omni-mechs, but that's a discussion for another day. But you can understand why the Mad Cat is so kind of well known. It just looks amazing. It's kind of got the chassis of a catapult, which is the mech you can get in this game. And it's got these big missile pods and these arms, which it's very cool. But one of the other really recognisable mechs in BattleTech is the urban mech, and he's basically just a walking little trash can. It's very, very odd design, but generally in BattleTech people love or they hate the Urbi mech, or the urban mech, generally called the Urbis. But For me, they do a completely decent job. I mean, they're very much like the Blackjack. You know, if you had like a force on a budget, then Urban Mech's a good option. It's basically just a walking turret, very, very slow. That's kind of what they are noted for. And as the name suggests, being an urban mech, they're used for urban warfare, so they can jump around buildings and basically just shoot with basically an AC-10. That's all they do. That's an autocannon 10, so it's like one of the bigger autocannons. So that's kind of the hood here and what we've got. You can see the weights of the mechs are listed. So 55 ton for the Shadowhawk, 45 for the Vindicator and the Blackjack, and 30 tons for the Urbi mech, or the Urban mech, sorry. Just in terms of how that separates out, any mech between 20 and 35 tons is designated a light mech. Anything between 40 and 55 is a medium mech. Anything between 60 and 75 is a heavy mech. And anything between 80 and 100 tons is an assault mech. They're like the premium weapons of war in BattleTech, the assault mechs. For now, though, we're very early in the game, and these three mechs we start with. So we start with the Shadowhawk, the Vindicator, and the Blackjack. We actually get I think it's a Locust and a Spider, sold both of those, and then I really looked out and managed to get 3 points of salvage in a mission for an Urbi, and then I picked up a random piece of an Urbi in a store, so I was able to make an Urbi, which is lovely. In terms of this game, I think the Urban Mechs are really quite powerful early on because they can use that AC-10 very effectively. Generally in this game, one of my criticisms of it is that it tends to, and this is going to sound intuitive, but it's not really how BattleTech should be. Like, medium mechs are better than light mechs, heavy mechs are better than medium mechs, assault mechs are better than heavy mechs. And I don't really like that. It's not really how BattleTech is. Usually you can take down an assault mech with lots of light mechs or tanks. It's kind of a vanity thing just to think that you can throw a 100-ton Atlas on there and win the day. It doesn't usually pan out that way. In this game, it does. They've kind of made it so that the deck is stacked against the lighter mechs. But it is what it is. But I think if you're going to play this game through properly and on a decent level of difficulty, you need to migrate to those heavy mechs as quickly as you can, because they really do change the nature of the game for you and make things a lot easier. There are a lot of good medium mechs in this game as well, very, very good, very, very quick and manoeuvrable, but generally speaking you need the heavy mechs and the assault mechs to succeed. Which is a shame, because it would have been nice to have to need light mechs at the latter point in the game, but you really don't. You really can't afford to take them. The one way they could have gotten around that was to put tonnage restrictions on the missions, but they don't. I personally like tonnage restrictions as long as it's done correctly. I think it's a very good mechanic to kind of make you think about the game and tactics a little bit more, but it doesn't exist in the core priority missions in this game. It does exist in the flashpoints, but I'll discuss that on another day. So that's kind of the hood here, and there's a little bit of extra data here. This is like a little on the bottom right here, which some of my head might be obscuring some of this, but you can see there's like a little card with armor levels and heat efficiency and firepower. But I'll discuss all that when I get into the refit. So first things first, let's go and have a look. We'll start with the Shadowhawk here, so we'll just click on the refit button. Just another point of note, actually, if I click on View Mech here, you can see this might not look like the Shadowhawk you have if you have this game. It's because there is some DLC that I got access to, which means you can basically put a different skin on the Shadowhawk. I don't know why they choose the Shadowhawk. It's the only one I think they do it for. But this is a lot chunkier. It's a big chunky boy, this 55-ton mech. In fact, he very much looks like a 65-tonner to me with his skin. But it does look pretty cool. He's got this little open hatch for his missile racks, and he also has the the company logo on his arm as well, which is pretty nice. The reason why I did actually use this particular skin though is because I run this Shadowhawk, which I've called Vicks, and that's my name for the Shadowhawk. I run it as a tank, or a pseudo tank. It's not a tank in the strictest sense of the word. But basically, you usually associate Shadowhawk with jump jets. I've stripped all the jump jets out and just put more weaponry on there and more armor, because I don't really have a tank. In this lance, in the 4 mechs that I've got, the Urbi mech and the Shadowhawk are going to act as tank, and then the Vindicator and the Blackjack will act as the manoeuvring, jumping mechs that will basically skirmish from afar and get the opposition out of position, things like that. But for this purpose, the Shadowhawk is a tank. Now, because you don't have many options early on in the game, you just get given what you get given. The Shadowhawk is absolutely the best option for a tank. The reason being that it has a really interesting and strange quirk in its chassis, and that's on its melee attack. So if we just hover over this melee section here, you can see it's what you're looking for there is total damage. So it's base damage plus the chassis quirk, and that gives you a total of 85 damage. That is insanely high for a medium mech. Just put that in context. If I go to the Blackjack here, which granted has pretty pathetic melee because it doesn't have any arms, it just has two big like AC2s sticking on the side of it. But if we go to the melee of the Blackjack, you'll see that it's 40. It's got a chassis quirk there of -5, so that's obviously a penalty for not having any arms. But for whatever reason, and I don't really understand the mechanic of it, it seems quite arbitrary. I mean, if I ever look to this side, because I've got a list of all the mechs and all their stats here, and it's by far like the heaviest hitting standard medium mech. Important to note, standard, there is something called the Hatchet Man in this game, which does 110 damage as a melee attack, but it has a hatchet in its hand, and that hatchet takes up tonnage. So that's not a fair comparison, but just in terms of all the regular like mechs, the Shadowhawk has the most damage at 85. Ergo, it's a very, very good tank mech, because if you need to get in and do a punch, really good options. And 85 damage against any like light mech is going to absolutely devastate them. It's the reason why I've actually put a support weapon on here, the S laser, because you will automatically shoot the support weaponry after doing a physical attack, so you get a little bit more like bang for your buck. Unfortunately, it can only fit one support weapon on. If you could fit two on, I think it would make it into a really, really interesting mech. This into quite like far into the game, but for now, it's kind of operating as a pseudo tank. I'll tell you why in a second. It's not actually a proper tank, but for now, as it stands, it's my biggest mech, it's my toughest mech, and it has that really weird, interesting melee attack point there with that extra damage, so that's great. So, what are we going to talk about today then? Let me just get my list up so I can have a look at this. Okay, so I've touched on a few things there, and I'll elaborate on some of those points that I was making, but I just wanted to kind of show you the lance first, and what I've kind of got in the Mechbay in the first instance. Now, when we talk about tonnage in BattleTech, it's kind of deceptive, because there is well, it's not deceptive if you play tabletop and you know how to make your own mech, so you can basically design your own mechs with your own weaponry. There is a mechanic used in the tabletop game where you can kind of decide what engine you want, and deciding on your engine is really like paramount to understanding how much weaponry you can then get on the mech. And the equation is very, very basic. The better the engine, the faster the mech, the less weapons you can get on there. Or put another way, the less what we call usable tonnage we have. Now you see, if I strip off here all equipment and I strip off all armor, yeah, I think that's everything. You can see here that we go down to 27 tons. So the actual like chassis and engine and structure and all the electronics of this Shadowhawk weigh 27 tons, and then we have 28 tons of remaining play around. So you can see if I put like a point of armor on, you can see all of a sudden it goes up. You know, like it tells us remaining there, so it's going down. The top figure's going up, the bottom figure's going down there. So if we put armor, you can see that those numbers change. And what you need to decide constantly is, and I'm just going to reset that, is like what you prefer and how you play. So for me personally, I tend to play quite a balanced game in BattleTech, so I do really like the maneuverable mechs. I love jump capable mechs. My squad leader or mercenary leader, Lemuel, Durant Oculus, his call sign, he will refuse to go into a mech that's not jump capable. So that's his thing. He loves jump capable mechs, and I kind of love jump capable mechs too. But I absolutely appreciate the necessity and the need for tank mechs. But BattleTech is a far more sophisticated game than just bringing guns to the party. You need to understand how those like little nuances work in regards like corralling your enemy into a kill zone, and you can only really do that by like maneuvering them with like mechs that are either jump capable or quick. So the Shadowhawk is a funny mech, and it's why I kind of hinted on it earlier. It's not really a true tank because it's so damn fast. You can see if we go over the movement here, you can see it comes in at 140 like max move, but it does a max sprint of 240, which is really, really quick for the size of the mech. So most of this mech, most of its weight, or not most of its weight, a good chunk of its weight is given over to its engine. That's why it's so quick. And usually speaking, a Shadowhawk would come with jump jets, but I have stripped them off because I've turned it into a tank, basically. Another point why it's not a tank is because it's got an AC5 on there. The AC5 has what we call minimum like range penalty. So you've seen the red there, it says minimum 90 meters. That means if I am closer than 90 meters to an enemy, I'll take a penalty to hit. So you really want to be shooting that from afar. A tank would never really have, that's not true. You can do that for sure. But if you want a 55 ton mech where you have limited weapons, you really don't want to have that range penalty. But the fact of the matter is, an AC-10 wouldn't fit on a Shadowhawk very comfortably. I'd have to strip off a lot of the other weaponry and it'd just become a walking turret, which would be a bit of a waste. Ergo, I've got to make that decision between like the tonnage that I've got, and I've decided on the AC5, but the AC5 will only be shot at a distance. When I close in on an enemy, I'll be going with the other weaponry there, which is the SRMs and the M laser and the S laser and the physical attacks. So that's kind of how tonnage works, and how the kind of mechanic works with the engine as well. So generally speaking, if you see a quick mech, you're not going to get as much weapons on there. There are exceptions to that. There are Star League mechs in this game, which I'm not going to cover here, that do have like things like double Heatsinks built into the engine, which just make them amazingly efficient, and that gives you a little bit more like scope to put more weaponry on there, because they just really they're like the pinnacle of mechs, whereas the kind of the general stock 3025 mech which we're currently at in BattleTech terms are really like unsophisticated. They don't have great electronics on there. They don't have like amazing like lost tech weaponry on there. This is pretty standard for this era. You know, these weapons are common, these chassis are common, so that's where we are currently at. So next up, we'll talk a little bit about armor and internal structure. I've already hinted armor a little bit. You can see you can manipulate these figures here. There are many ways you can do this. I'm kind of meticulous, so I will go in and like design these mechs. You don't have to do that though. You can kind of just auto do the armor, where put your weaponry on and then just like max out armor, and it'll just give you whatever you've got left, and it'll spread them out between like the arms and the torso. I don't like doing that. I like to have everything not necessarily symmetrical. Like there would be a case on this particular Shadowhawk to actually cut the left arm armor down and then put armor up in other locations, because it doesn't have anything, doesn't have any weaponry. It has the arm mod, but we'll deal with that separately. But it doesn't have any weaponry on there, so it can lose its left arm comfortably. It doesn't matter. But as goes the actual like armor itself, my advice is be very well armored. There's kind of a meta like notion in this game that you want to have like double the amount of leg armor that you have on the center torso front, because otherwise you'll get targeted on your legs or your center torso. That's only when you're playing against other players. The AI in this game is not that smart, so generally speaking you can be a lot more like flexible. I tend to give good levels of armor everywhere. Rear, I'd say I do like average armor, but generally speaking I don't max it out, but I'll probably max out the arms, and then I'll put maybe 80% on the torso, the center torso, and I'll probably keep it quite high levels on the legs as well. You don't have to do that. You can actually strip all the armor off and just use like an LRM boat if you wanted to. So that means that you're just expecting not to be hit by any other opposition. So you can take all the armor off, put like tons of LRMs on there and do indirect fire, and just sit at the back of the battlefield pinging over missiles. But keep in mind, if you do get touched by anything, you will just exploderize. So, you know, you do need armor to some extent. And I tend to play that way. I play quite direct in BattleTech, so it'll be 2 tanks, 2 maneuverable mechs, and then we'll corral an enemy and get them into a kill zone. And just really, it's like a conservative general play. So you'll just like soak up the damage from the opposition with the tanks, and then you'll just like grind them down in a kill zone. So next up, we've got internal structure. Internal structure, like the armor, is this white number here. Internal structure is the orange structure. Basically what happens is the armor gets stripped off first by either weapons or physical attacks. It tells you very clearly on there, so you can see on the AC5 damage is 45. If that hits, so let's say that hits the left torso, and we've got 120 armor, minus 45 will be taken off that 120. Once that gets down to 0, any damage inflicted will hit into the internal structure, of which it's 65 on the left torso. When that gets to 0, it exploderizes. Damage transfers in BattleTech as well. It all kind of works inwards to the central torso. So if you have, let's say you have damage to a right arm, your right arm's destroyed, for instance, and your right torso is still fine. If you get any damage on the right arm, it will just transfer to the right torso. When the right torso is destroyed, it will transfer to the center torso. Therefore, when you start seeing things explode off your mech, it's kind of end game, because any extra damage done on there is transferring directly to your center torso. When the center torso is destroyed, the mech is cored and destroyed. That's what cored means in BattleTech, which means destroying the center torso. If the head is destroyed, so that's all armor and internal structure is gone, then the mech warrior is dead and the mech falls over, because obviously there's no one there to pilot it. Or the final way you can destroy a mech is to destroy both legs, and they're the 3 ways: so center torso, head, or both legs. You can do crits in this game as well, which I've never really figured that out. I know it works on tabletop, and I think it's similar, but if you kind of get into the internal structure, you can damage like components in there. So like, for instance, you could crit the SRM6 here. However, I've still noticed that you can still use the weapon after it's critted. So I don't really know what the mechanic is on that. At first I thought it might like stop you from firing that weapon on the next turn, but it doesn't seem to do that. So it's a bit of a useless mechanic. There are weapons as well that have like extra crit chances, but I don't know. You can destroy things. Maybe it does crit, and then if you get it again, it destroys it. Maybe it's something like that. But it's a lot of things in this game are quite opaque. Like, I'm sure that someone somewhere online has kind of written out all the rules or whatever. And I know maybe like 98% of them. But the crit thing is a bit weird, and you see it pop up occasionally. It's like, oh, L laser crit. But then it's still firing its L laser. In the actual tabletop game, if you crit like any component, it dies, as it should. It doesn't matter how big it is. It doesn't matter how many how many like tiles it takes. Like the SRM here takes up like 2 segments. If you destroy one segment of the SRM, that basically crits the component and it can't work anymore. So it's slightly odd how it works in this game, but hey ho. So that's internal structure. I think next we will deal with mod components now, because they are quite important in this game and often overlooked. There are actually 2 on here. There's the gyro and the arm mod. You can also get leg mods, and you can get mods for your head as well. The gyros, they always sit in the center torso. Every mech has a gyro. It's basically the thing that keeps it standing. And this just gives you a bit of a bonus. So you can see here it gives us 1 melee hit. So it's presuming that's like an increased chance to hit. Or it's not extra damage, it must be an extra chance to hit. The arm mod, this particular one gives us plus 20% melee stability damage, which is great because physical attacks basically make a mech unsound and then they can fall over. So plus 20% to that. All these like components are reflected in the overall here. So you can see if we go to melee, you can see it says stability damage is 75. If we take this off, this should theoretically now go down to 55. There you are. So that's the 20% that gives. That's really good as well. Like having that stability damage is real king in this game. So good to get those. And stability damage, of course, several weapons do stability damage, physical attacks do stability damage, and there's a stability meter, and you want to get that high because it means that at a certain point the opponent can't run, and if you get it that stability meter to the end, then it falls over and it loses an initiative point, and I'll talk about that in the next tutorial when I do the first campaign mission. The two that I don't have here, I don't have a leg mod. Leg mod basically gives you bonuses to either do more damage from death from above or do less self damage from death from above. Death from above is basically when you jump on a mech. With a mech that is jump capable, but it does damage to your own legs, but it does pretty catastrophic damage to the opponent mech if you hit. The head mods, there are several of them. There are things like cockpit mods, which give you like a free life for your mech warrior. There are things that give you like more visibility, and then there's like an extra communications thing which increases your resolve every turn. As I get those, I'll talk about them, but I don't have any at the moment. The other big thing it's kind of a mod, I suppose, in some respects, are the heat sinks. Now, heat sinks in BattleTech are really important and very interesting, and every engine has heat sinks built in. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this heat sink here. We've got one on the Shadowhawk, and just go over our heat efficiency, and you can see that our heat sinking is 30 heat. That 30 is reflected of the 10 heat sinks in our engine. So each regular heatsink does -3, or takes away -3 heat a turn, and the core base level is 30, ergo 3 times 10, or -3 times 10 in this case, that's 30. So we do 30, we lose 30 heat a turn. If you get too hot, your mech shuts down. If you get, that bit can basically make you a sitting duck for opponents, so you don't really want to go over the heat limit. It also does internal structure damage to you, so that's not good. But again, I'll deal with this. Maybe in the next game I might try to overheat at some point just to show how that works. I'm sure I'll do it at some point anyway, because it can be quite a good tactic sometimes to overheat. If you can get that like killing blow on the opponent, it can be worth it. If I put the heatsink back here, so that's an external heatsink in the right leg there. And if we hover over heat efficiency, you can see it's now at 33, so it's gone up by 3. And you can, they all weigh 1 ton, so you can put as many heat sinks on as you can get in your tonnage. So I could like take the SRM6 off. Then our heat efficiency would become 42 heat sinking. But I don't want to do that. The reason why I don't want to do that is because the primary thing to look at there is your alpha striking. So just below that, which is 42 heat. So alpha strike is basically just shorthand for when you fire all your weapons. Won't really be doing that very often on the Shadowhawk because the penalties on the AC5, the minimum range penalties, are really bad. So I'll either be attacking with, like, say, the AC5 and the SRM to the M laser, or I'll be going in for physical attacks, punchy robots with the S laser. So at most I'm probably going to be doing, I don't know, like, let's have a look here. AC5 generates 8 heat and the S laser generates 6 heat. So at most, really, my alpha strike will be, 34? Something like that. So, keep that in mind, that it's always a little bit deceptive. It depends what kind of weaponry you've got on there. But if you want those two, if possible, to be quite equal, if you can have, like, heat sinking dead on, it means that you're running cool. So you can just shoot to your heart's content. That changes slightly if you've got jump jets, because jump jets generate heat. So if you are jumping around and shooting, that might generate an extra 8 heat a turn. So you have to factor that in as well, but it's not with the Shadowhawk because it doesn't have any jump jets. There are other kind of heat management systems you can get as well as heat sinks. There are 3 other special heat sinks. There's the exchanger. That actually gives you like a minus percentage to heat generated by weapons. So for instance, like the general exchanger will get rid of like minus 10% heat. So on this laser, it generates 12 heat, so you minus 10% off that 12, and then you'd basically get that bonus. So it might be an extra 3 less heat a turn for shooting that laser if you've got an exchanger. You've also got the heat bank. I've actually got a heat bank here, so we can read that directly. I managed to pick 2 up, which is amazing, but I've not had time to fit them on any of my mechs yet. That gives you plus 10% max heat that you can generate, and it gives you a plus 5% overheat threshold for your mech warrior. So that means that your mech warrior can deal with like that extra 5% heat before he has to deal, or she has to deal with the shutdown problems. They're super powerful. You can get plus variants of these as well. So there is like the heat bank double plus, which will do plus 20% max, or plus 10 max heat. You can see if I could put one of these on here. So let's say we take the heat sink off, put the heat bank on. You can see my heat efficiency now. The shutdown there becomes 110 Before it was 100, now it's 110. So that's what it does. It gives you a little bit more like scope to deal with in regards like your heat management. You really need to kind of use a mixture of these. So like heat sinks, exchanges and heat banks together work very well. The final thing that you can get is double heat sinks. They are just like regular heat sinks, but they do -6 instead of -3. Very, very powerful. Quite rare as well at this time in the BattleTech universe. That's not negative about them, but they take up 3 like spaces on your mech, and you can see there is limited space. So like a heat bank, for instance, takes up 2. A double heatsink would take up 3. That's not a problem on a 55-ton mech, but it's absolutely a problem on like a 100-ton mech, because you'll have so much more weaponry on there that you'll be kind of trying to make space for things. So that does factor in, but not so much. I mean, you can still do it. I mean, very often, like on a 100-ton Atlas, I will have filled out every component on here with like exchangers, heat banks, UAC weaponry, missiles, the lot. Like every piece of it will be taken up. But on your lighter mechs, you don't have to deal with that factor, really. You see there's plenty of empty space on here. So that's like heat management and how heat management works, and getting your head around that is really like fundamental to success. The only way to kind of figure it out really is to test it. So don't be afraid to kind of just have a play around, strip things off, put things back on, go into the mission, see what works for you, see what doesn't. There's one variable factor in this as well, and that's that heat is intrinsically tied to the guts rating of your mech warriors. So for instance, if someone is like 2 out of 10 for guts, it means that they have a much less like heat threshold than someone who's got guts of 10, and that will give them like a real like extra bonus in terms of being able to fire more weaponry and deal with the heat more effectively. So keep an eye out for that. Mech warriors with good gut skills should be in hotter mechs. It just makes them much more efficient. And when you tie all those things together, heat banks, exchanges, heat sinks, mech warriors with guts, you get like the game will kind of create a figure for you as to how many times you can alpha strike. And ideally you want to be alpha striking, 2 or 3 would be amazing. Twice would be excellent as well. If you're finding though that you can only do like 1 alpha strike and then you're maxing out all your heat, you probably have to go back to the drawing board on that, get rid of a bit of weaponry, put a bit more heat management on, just have a play around. So they're kind of the mods and heat efficiency, which kind of is a mod as well to some extent. That's the real basics. What I'm going to move on to now though are the different weapon types, of which in this game there are 4. Now you can see this section here tells us how many component hardpoints or weapon hardpoints I have available to me on this mech. So you can see there are 3 ballistic, there is 1 energy, there are 3 missile, and there is 1 support. These are then all on different parts of the mech. So you can see the one support hardpoint here is on the right arm, and it's been loaded up. So it's the S laser. If I take the S laser off, you can see that drops to 0. Now, what I effectively need to balance when I'm doing this is, what is your mech used for? What are you using it? What are you doing with it? Is it a ranged sniper? Is it a skirmish mech? Is it a tank? Is it like an assassin? Are you looking to get like rear shots? Because rear armor is quite weak, so you might want to kind of get really quickly in there and do rear shots to a mech. What's your intention? And different hardpoints do different things. So for instance, like ballistics, which let's just go into weapons here and have a look. So at the moment I've only got AC2 in my storage unit, and I've got an AC5 equipped. There are 4 types of AC weapons. There are AC2s, AC5s, AC10s and AC20s. The bigger the number, the higher the damage, but the less range. So an AC2, for instance, has very long range, really limited damage. An AC20 does really amazing damage, but has quite limited range. And the bigger they are, the more they weigh, and the more slots they take, and the more ammo they kind of eat. I'm only going to deal with the core weaponry at this point, so I'm not going to talk about UAC weaponry, I'm not going to talk about Gauss rifles, because I don't have any. And as I do get those, I will talk about them, but for now we're just going to deal with the regular old autocannons. Now, with every weapon, you have like positives and negatives. So let's go through the ballistics positives first. So real positive of AC weaponry is quite low heat. So you can see if we kind of scroll over the AC5 here, heat 8, does 45 damage. In comparison, an M laser that does 12 heat and it does 25 damage. That's deceptive though, because what we talk about in BattleTech is the tonnage to damage ratio, and if you're doing that exclusively, then the M laser is the best weapon in the game by a mile because it only weighs 1 ton, whereas the AC5, it weighs 8 tons, so huge difference. And as soon as you see that, you think, why on earth would I ever put a ballistic on there? Well, there are several reasons. We'll talk about them in a second. The big point of advantage for an AC weaponry is what I would call like the 1 point of damage, and that's what make it, even though the M lasers look amazing from that damage to tonnage ratio, they don't do the levels of 1 point damage that AC weaponry does. So even an AC5, which is the second lightest AC weapon out of 4, it does 45 damage. So that's at 1 point on an opposing mech if it hits. So it might hit the right torso, it might hit the left leg, it might hit the head. You do 45 points of damage, and that's pretty decent levels of damage for this game. It also does stability damage. I've talked about that already. Stability damage is great in BattleTech, or in this particular game. If we go to the M laser here, you can see it does no stability damage. So that's another big factor or the big advantage that you get. What else have we got here? Yeah, I mean, that really does cover all the advantages. They are really good advantages though. Like, there's nothing, the stability damage and the 1 point of damage make them amazing, but they do have a lot of negatives. Range, I can't say is either positive or negative because it depends on the AC weaponry. Like AC2s have amazing range, AC20s have pretty terrible range. AC2s and AC5s also have those minimum range penalties as well, so that's a negative. In terms of like general negatives, I've already dealt with one of them. They're very heavy, so that takes up more. If we take the AC5 off here, we go down to 47 tons. So it takes a lot of tonnage to get these big cannons on the side of your mech. They generally take up quite a few slots. Not the AC2. The good old AC2 only takes up 1, but the AC20 will take up several. It's really quite big, but I don't have any to show you at this point in the game. The third point is kind of an obscure one, but it's very important, and that's that they suffer from recoil penalties. Now, this isn't a thing that exists on tabletop. This is pretty much unique to this game. Recoil effect basically means let's take 3 turns. So turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. If you shoot the AC weapon on turn 1, on turn 2, you think about it like a real world scenario. It's a big cannon with a shell. The shell is shot, and the weapon is like vibrating and hot, and like it's thrown your like mech maybe slightly off kilter because of the force of the recoil. So if you shoot that on turn 2, so like literally immediately after, your percentage to hit will decrease. So you might go from 70% to 55% in that from turn 1 to turn 2. If, however, you don't shoot it on the second turn and you just let it cool down, on turn 3, there is no recoil penalty. Now, that is, it can, early on in the game, before your mech warriors can really shoot very well, that can be quite bad. As the gunnery skills start getting better, though, and there is one of the traits, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, the recoil penalty, I'm guessing it's on guts, I think. Could be on, I don't think it's on gunnery. I think gunnery just gives base percentage increases to your chance to hit. But if you can get mech warriors that are better at dealing with the recoil, then it kind of mitigates that a lot, and it might then turn from like 85% to 80%, which isn't that catastrophic. But it is quite bad when you're going from like 60 down to 40 percentage. That's not great. So it's there because the AC weaponry is so good, so it's nerfing the AC weaponry a little bit. So it's slightly annoying, but I understand why they've done it, and it's quite a good mechanic to factor in when you're doing your tactics, because you can work around it just by switching it off on the turns we're talking about on turn 2. So you just fire with your secondary weapon, or you're going for a physical attack and let the recoil disappear or dissipate. And the final negative, which is it applies to anything with ammo, it has ammo. So let's deal with the negatives of the ammo. And whenever I say anything is negative with ammo, it's the same. They're all terrible for it because ammo is what it is. It's limited. That's the main thing. So you can see we've got We've got 15 rounds here in this AC5, so we can shoot 15 times in any given game. That's fine, actually. Generally, the games in this, especially on the priority missions, usually last between like 12 and 18 turns. Because of the recoil thing, you're probably not going to be shooting the AC5 every turn anyway, so you probably will kind of come out of the mission with ammo to spare. So 1 point of ammo is fine for an AC5. UAC weapon is different because that shoots 2 shells together, which is why they're so devastating, but it uses double the ammo. So that's kind of the payoff there. So ammo, it's limited, obviously. It takes up tonnage. It takes only 1 ton, but it still takes up tonnage. It takes up 1 slot. And most terrifying of all, it's explosive. So if your ammo gets critted, you basically exploderize. It's not as terrifying as the tabletop version. Tabletop BattleTech is completely ruthless. If in this area in 3025, if your ammo blows up and there's any ammo left in it, it's curtains. Your mech basically gets caught out. In this game, I've noticed it's usually not that catastrophic, so I don't know what the exact mechanic is, but it tends to be less horrifying than tabletop. But it's still horrifying. If you have ammo go up, then you're basically dead. I haven't had a chance yet to switch out the SRM ammo from the centre torso. That's really not a good idea. I usually tend to put ammo in the legs like this, because if it does blow up, then it'll blow the leg up as opposed to coring the mech. But I haven't had a chance to change it because I'm still just trying to kind of get them on the field like adequately suited up and change them as much as I can to how I want to play them. But as we go on, you'll see that I tend to put ammo in the legs there. So that's ballistics. Next, we've got energy hardpoints. There are basically, well, again, I'm not dealing with Lost Tech here. We're just dealing with the actual like stock weaponry at this time period. We've got the L laser, the M laser, and the PPC. M laser is hands down the most efficient weapon in the game. Generates quite a bit of heat, but for 1 ton, 25 damage, you can't go wrong with that. Absolutely incredible. Decent range as well. Optimal 180 meters, max 270. Not amazing, but absolutely sufficient. The L laser on even on tabletop is a weird weapon. They weigh a hell of a lot. I mean, 5 tons. And you only get 40 damage out of them, although you do get a lot more range, so that's the payoff. You're basically paying for the range there. I can make L lasers work in this game with certain mechs, but generally, if you're kind of doing a laser spam, you're probably better off with M lasers, and having a mech that's well armoured and can soak up a bit of like damage, but deal a really decent levels of damage if you've got like 4 or 5 M lasers on there. That's kind of the meta of this game. I also think that's a bit boring, so I try to be a little bit more creative in how I do things personally. And then finally, we've got the PPC, which we're just going to nip out of the Shadowhawk there and go in the Vindicator. The PPC is an amazing weapon. Range is phenomenal. So you see it's got a 360... well, it's very long. It's not phenomenal. It's very long. It's good range. Max 540. Damage 50, so it does more than an AC5. It even does stability damage, which is not like any other energy weapon. It's the only energy weapon, yes, that does stability damage in this game. The payoff is the heat. 35 heat per turn is pretty horrifying, but if you use the PPC correctly, they can be devastating. Very, very, very powerful weapons. In terms of positive and negatives for like the energy hard points, obviously it differs. Like the PPC, it weighs a lot as well, so it's 7 tons. So whereas an M laser just weighs 1, so it depends what energy hard point you're using. For the PPC, if you can get the PPC to work for you properly, the 7 tons is worth it. They're great, great weapons. But again, you have some mechs you will just not be able to accommodate a PPC because they're just too big. They are, like I've already intimated this, they kind of are the energy weapon in this game is kind of seen as the stock weaponry. Like, if in doubt, just use energy weapons. You can't really go wrong with those. And no ammo is needed either. Unlimited ammo, so that's fantastic. Their kind of ammo is the heat that they generate, I suppose. That's the kind of payoff for it. But Yeah, that's super good, especially if you're going into missions that you know are going to last a long time. You always know that by putting an energy hard point on there, as long as the component survives, you're going to be able to fire it, as long as you can manage the heat, obviously. I suppose one final thing, if you're talking about like 1 point of damage, M-Laser's okay with 25, the PPC's excellent with 50. Always think about that as well. That 1 point of damage is really overlooked in this game. Like, you're not just looking, like, how it works is if you let's say you shoot 5 M lasers at a mech. Let's say this bugbear, who's my Vindicator, gets 5 M lasers shot at it. That's 25 damage times 5, so 125 damage. Each one of those 25s might hit a different area. So 2 might hit the right and left leg, 2 might hit the right and left arm, and 1 might hit the right torso. So that's not going to kill someone. That's going to strip their armor down, but it's not going to hurt anybody. A PPC or an AC-10 is going to do a lot more damage, and that 1 point of damage, like on the right torso, can basically cause catastrophic impact on an opponent. In this game, tactically, we talk about like, it's the terms I use. I'm sure there are other terms for it, but there are like sandpaper mechs. So there are mechs that will go in and just like strip the armor off an opponent, and then you've got like finisher mechs. So mechs that go in with like then a big UAC cannon and just go for the torso shot just to pop the mech. So that's kind of tactically how it works. Next up, we've got missile weaponry. So we'll stick on the Vindicator for now, because there are 2 types. There are LRMs, that's long range missiles, and there are SRMs, that's short range missiles. They are SRMs. There are 3 types. There are SRM2s, SRM4s, SRM6s. The number denotes how many missiles are shot each turn. Then there are LRMs, LRM5, LRM10, LRM15 and LRM20, and that again denotes how many missiles there are. So an LRM20 fires 20 missiles, SRM6 fires 6. The LRMs tend to do less levels of damage, so you can see there that damage is 4 times 5. It attacks it hits on a cluster as well. So let's say, for example, you hit with this LRM5, 5 missiles will hit an opponent, and say like 2 might miss, 2 might hit the right torso, 1 might hit the left leg, something like that. Obviously, and then the more missiles you have, the higher chance you have of hitting with more missiles, the more damage that you do. They're basically used as like mass armor strippers of the LRMs and the SRMs, so they're not there to finish, they're there to strip armor away. They also do stability damage. They generate pretty low levels of heat. I mean, the SRM4, for instance, what are we on here? 8 heat. The SRM6 will be 12 heat then. LRM5 only generates 6 heat. LRM20s will generate a lot more. Don't have any LRM20s, have an LRM10 though. That generates 10 heat. So quite average heat, I'd say. Where they're amazing is the for the LRMs is the range. They have incredible range. Look at that, optimal 420, max 630, and basically that's the entire battlefield that you're on. They do have really quite severe minimum range penalties though, so you can never really get up close and hit with an LRM. That doesn't apply for SRMs though, obviously, because they are made for short range missiles. If we hover over the SRM, you can see there, that's the payoff. They do more damage, but they've got much more limited range. I've kind of dealt with all the positives and negatives there as I've been talking. So like, wear down armor, they do stability damage. Another thing is 2 other like weird things here. Because you're hitting with so many clusters, so like if you were hitting with like 2 LRM20s, that's 40 missiles, you've got a much more increased chance of hitting the head. And if you hit the head of a mech, then you automatically take 1 point of damage off the mech warrior. So if you're trying to incapacitate a mech warrior and kill them so you can get the good salvage, you know, the missiles can be a good option. Same with machine guns, they do the same thing. Like, it's just like a scatter gun approach, and it just there's a better chance that you'll hit a head with one of those shots. And any shot, even if it's just 1 tiny piece of damage, will automatically injure the mech warrior. Sorry. And the LRM has a unique feature as well, and that's indirect fire. So if you have a lance mate who can see an opponent, but you can't see them directly, you can fire over obstacles to hit them. You do get like a minus, or well, it'll be a plus, because plus is always negative in minus in BattleTech, and negatives are always positive in BattleTech. So you have a plus to hit, which isn't great, but if you got the tactics skill, you can mitigate that a little bit. I really like indirect fire, or well, LRM fire, whether it's direct or indirect, it's inconsequential. But I only really tend to use LRMs on bigger mechs. I've kept the LRM5 on Bugbear because I want to show an LRM at how it works when I get into the mission next. But generally speaking, I only like LRMs on things like catapults, archers, stalkers, like big missile boats that can deal mass damage, as opposed to like on Bugbear where the LRM5 is really quite redundant. It's not doing much at all, and you're taking up a point of ammo there. It's just wasted space, but it is what it is, and at this point in the game it's absolutely fine. Anything else to say about missiles? Not really, other than ammo is a negative. Obviously they take ammo. The ammo's it's different than the ballistic ammo there. You can see there it's much higher, so 120 rounds for one ammo bin. That means we only fire 5 missiles per turn, so there's a hell of a lot of ammo there. We don't really need the full, you'd never really need the full 120 there. But if you have like an LRM-20, if you have 2 LRM-20s, you can potentially fire 40 missiles per turn, so you're going to need a hell of a lot more ammo bins to support that. And finally, we have support weaponry, so I'm going to have to go back to the Shadowhawk for this. And here we are, we've got one equipped at the moment, so that's the S-Laser. Support weaponry in this game is really, really good. I love it, absolutely brilliant, I think. It has this like amazing feature that you automatically shoot your support weapons after you do a physical attack. That's glorious. There are 3 types of support weaponry. I've got access to all of them here as well. So we've got S-Lasers, machine guns, and flamers. Flamers are very useful. They do a little bit of damage. You see they do a little bit of damage, just a little bit of damage. But what they're really useful for is heating up the opposition. So if you can basically do like external heat to them, and then they can't necessarily fire their weapons properly on the next turn because they'll be going into, or they can, but they'll be overheating and doing damage to themselves, potentially shutting themselves down. I tend to build mechs like shutdown mechs. So a good example quite early on is something like a fire starter. You can put flamers on a fire starter. You might even get lucky and be able to pick up like inferno missiles, which are like basically, they're effectively like SRMs, but they generate heat. But you'll need a mech that can support missile points to do that. But if you get a mech that has inferno missiles and flamers, you can play like shut down roulette and just go and basically melt your opposition and shut them down, which is fantastic, obviously. But I don't put them on randomly. Like I'm never going to put like a flamer just on the Shadowhawk. It's a waste of time. I'd much rather just have the S-Laser on. The S-Laser is just a tiny little laser. It does pretty decent damage, just 20 damage, generates 6 heat. But it's got really terrible range, 90 meters, so you can only hit it if you're like basically right next to a mech, or you do a physical attack and then it automatically shoots it. Machine guns are... I only use the machine gun plus variants because they don't weigh anything. They're like miraculous like objects, like they weigh 0. This one does. This weighs half a ton, but a machine gun double plus weighs nothing. So the only cost that you've got is the ammo. They're really strong, but I don't have any yet. I mean, eventually I'm hoping to get a few and I'll fit them on mechs because they're great. They just do like lots of like scatter damage to a mech, and they are fun. I mean, it's good to watch the daka of the machine gun. Again, terrible range. They do use ammo, so that's a negative. Flamers don't use ammo. They've got inbuilt ammo, so that's slightly different. So yeah, just like support weaponry, I personally think is super good in this game, and well worth trying to get a mech that has like maybe 4 support points. Off the top of my head, there is a variant of the Warhammer, which is a 70 ton mech. Yes, yeah, I want to say 70. 75 came in my mind there, but I don't think it is 75. Let's just check. I've got a list of all the mechs here. Yes, it's a 70 ton mech. There is a variant of the Warhammer. It's the where is it? Support Hardpoints 4. Right, so it's the 6R. That has 4 energy hardpoints, which makes it very, very good. You basically get like 4 like S lasers or machine guns on there, and it does its chassis naturally does a lot of damage in physical attack, so that can be an absolute murder machine, that variant of the Warhammer. So if you do pick those mechs up that have like lots of support points, you can use them to your advantage. Maybe not early on in the game. If you're getting used to the game, be careful with that, but as you get used to it and you get used to how physical attacks work, how stability damage works, things like that, then you can kind of, or heat, especially being able to shut down a mech, you can really like start to use that to your advantage, and it's very fun to do. So we're nearly at the end because I've covered all the weaponry now. I'm just going to see what else I have to talk about here. Two other things, then I'm going to finish the video. But I'll cover a little bit more because I'm going to go through these stats here and how they work. But we'll deal with. Let's go into the Urbi in the first instance, and we've seen this a little bit already, I think, because I've got a plus variant on that flamer. You can see the Urbi here, this is Oscar, and he is just a walking turret. So he's got an AC 10 and he's got 8 bullets. So he can basically do 8 shots in a game, and then he just has to retreat and run away. You can see next to this AC 10 there is a plus, and that is where we get plus 5 damage. It's basically a special variant of this autocannon, so it's a Kaliyama. And you can get like double or treble pluses on certain weapons, and it gives you these like little extra bonuses. They're super useful. Eventually in this game, you really want to like the mechs that you're like continuously using. You want to have as many plus variants as possible on them because it really does give you an edge over the opposition. And the other thing I wanted to talk about very briefly, but I can't discuss it in depth, so I don't have any, but is Lost Tech weaponry. And again, I've kind of said this already, but I will show these as I get them. So when I get UAC weaponry, I'll show you how that works. When I get pulse weaponry, I'll show you how that works. They've all got like their quirks, and they're always advantageous. So for instance, I already said this, but a UAC weapon will fire 2 shots per turn. The pulse weaponry will have a built-in like accuracy targeting system, so you get a -2 to hit, which makes it very, very powerful. Like the L pulses and the M pulses can be fantastic in this game, but they do weigh more than like a regular M pulse weighs 2 tons, whereas an M laser weighs 1 ton. But the M pulse does more damage and it's more accurate, but they are very rare. But as you get them, keep hold of them. They're very, very fun. Very good. There's also S pulses as well. That's like the support variant of that. I really like them. They're really, really good in this game, actually. I've talked about Inferno rockets. There's also like targeting systems you can get in this game. So there's like tags and narcs. They are like basically weapons that you fire at an opponent that don't do any damage, but they attach themselves onto the mech, and then they increase your chances to hit it with certain weaponry. So for instance, a narc increases, I think, the damage output of missiles hitting that mech, and the tag increases the chance to hit with ballistics and energy weaponry. I think that's right what I've said. I do use them, but they are quite hard to find. They're quite rare. So that's kind of all the weaponry, all the kind of armor, all that stuff. I think I've dealt with everything there. One thing, I'm going to show one other thing, and then I'll wrap the video up. And it's almost something you've got to be careful of because it can be quite deceptive. But if you have, and I've done one of them already, so we've done heat efficiency, so we're not going to deal with that one now because I've covered all the heat striking, alpha strike, things like that. If you hover over firepower there, you can see it gives you a max damage like output ratio. So you see if we add all our weapons up there, all the damage up, we do 155 damage. That's the alpha strike. But the chances of you doing that are very remote, that you're not going to hit with all those weapons, and even on the Shadowhawk, I'm especially not going to be doing it because I can't envisage a scenario where I'm shooting my AC5 and my S laser, because I'll be in such close proximity to the enemy that the AC5 is going to have really bad minimum range penalties. So I'm never going to be able to do 155 points of damage. More so, all that damage is spread out across the mech. So if all 154 points were on like the center torso, right, then you'd basically, like in this Shadowhawk's case, you'd strip off all its central armor. Instead, Each missile hits a different place or misses. An M laser will hit 1 point or miss. The AC-5 will hit 1 point or miss. So that's spread out. So be careful about that max damage stat. It's not to say you shouldn't look at it. I look at it all the time and I'll reference it. I'll be like, oh my goodness, like the max damage of this Atlas is 600 or something like that. But it's never 1 point of damage. So slightly spurious. And when you see these, like, it'll tell you, oh, you've got 10 out of 10 pips, so you are the best firepower mech. Look a little bit closer into that. Certainly do that on heat management or heat efficiency. It will often say that you are like absolutely heat efficient, and then you'll get into the game and you'll be absolutely terrible with it. So just be careful about how this mechanic works. I've already said it on heat efficiency. What you want to look at is heat sinking over alpha striking, and try to kind of make a balance in regards to that. It will automatically do all the math for you. So if you put an exchanger on here, it will bring down your alpha strike level. So if I had a regular heat sink on here, a regular heat exchanger, it would bring 42 down by 10%. So I'd have 10% of 42 minus from that figure. Movement is I don't have the jump jets on here. In fact, let's go to a jump capable mech. We'll go to the blackjacks. We've not looked at his refit yet. This is Buckaroo, my BJ1. If we go to his movement, you can see he has a max move of 120 meters, max sprint of 200 meters. That's really quite slow for a 200-ton mech, a 45-ton mech. Then you get a max jump. So he has got 4 out of 4 jump jets on here, and that means that he can jump 150 meters, which is completely adequate. Every mech is different. So like on my every mech with jump jets is different depending on how many jump jets you can put on there. So my Urbi mech can jump, but he's only got 2 jump jets on there, so you'd be able to jump much less, or not as far a distance as the blackjack here. Average range, so this gives you a max range, so that's always going to be your maximum weapon. So this is the AC2, which has 70-20 max, but not optimal, so those percentages will be low, so that's a bit deceptive as well. But what you're looking at there is optimal range. So if I'm within 300 meters of a mech, I don't know why it gives it in meters. It should just give it in like pips, because it kind of shows you pips. Or on the tabletop you talk about hex grids. So it's difficult to kind of gauge what 300 meters is away from you in game, but you kind of see it through the percentages, and then you instinctively learn how it works. So, but 300 meters is fine. That's absolutely not a problem. Durability deals with how much armor you have. So it gives structure there, 376, armor 840. That obviously changes as you move these down. So armor has now gone down to 815 there. Put that back up. So basically, yeah, like, again, you can deceive, that can be deceptive. If you put like full armor on the center torso and then no armor anywhere else, your mech's going to get chewed alive, but it will still look like you've got okay levels of armor. So that, again, is deceptive in regards to max armor, because it depends where you put it. Structure's quite important. Structure never changes, so you can see straight away like 376 for a 45-ton mech. As you get into like the higher echelons, the heavy and assault mechs, that number will increase. In fact, let's see that, because I think the so what have we got here? Sorry, durability 376, and we'll just go into the Shadowhawk, just see how that changes. 456 there. So as you're going up, you might get to assault mechs, it might be like 800 or something like that, which makes sense because they're bigger and chunkier and there's more about them. Stability defense, you can get that if you get certain gyros. That will kind of give you a bonus on your stability defense, but we don't have any of those yet. And then you get DFA self-damage. That doesn't apply to the Shadowhawk because he doesn't have jump jets, but if he did have jump jets, when he jumped on another mech, he'd do himself 70 points of damage. You can decrease that with leg mods, so you can get leg mods that will kind of take that level down a little bit, or they'll give more damage to the enemy when you jump on top of them. Death from above it's something I'm hoping to do in this game at some point. It's quite a rare move, and I either do it like it's a bit of a like nil desperandum, you've got no other option move, or just for the fun of it. Sometimes if you've got like a giant assault mech with jump jets and there's a little skinny like light mech near you can just jump on it and just crush it into the ground. It's quite amusing to do that. And then finally, we've got melee, which I've kind of discussed already, which is what you want to look at there is total damage. So so it's base damage. I don't know why they bother breaking that down, but it's base damage plus chassis quirk, and those two give you the total damage. Then gives you the total stability damage that you do, so 75, and then we get the DFA damage. So that's 140, which is pretty catastrophic. So we do 140 damage, but then we do 70 damage to ourselves as well. And I believe that is it. Yeah. So there you are. I think that's everything. That's heat management, weaponry, armor, all the kind of things you've got to watch out for, and deceptive stuff. So as long as you kind of... Best thing to do in this game, really, is to experiment. So just see what works for you. See what your style of play is. Some people, for instance, love like direct weapon fire, like AC weaponry, PPCs. Some people like to do like more, whether it's indirect or like ranged weaponry, like from the back, things like, you know, LRM clusters and things like that, and just basically destroy the opposition from afar. Find out what works for you. Try tanks, try snipers, and just play around with it. The heat management is the fun thing. I mean, if you get to a point where you've got a mech on the field and it does devastating levels of damage and it runs relatively cool, you know that you have won the game, because at that point nothing can really stop you. You're always going to generate heat, obviously, but if you can do like 3 alpha strikes with a big tank mech that does, say, let's say it has a max alpha strike damage of 500. I'm thinking of something like an Awesome, which is like an 80-ton. The clues in the name. They are awesome. They're absolutely devastating. So, you know, you can just experiment with things like that. See what works for you. I like to play balanced, which is why I think me recording this is probably going to work quite well for like new players, because I'll show everything. I love Daka weaponry. I love like LRMs on specific mechs, like the Archer, the Catapult. I love my PPCs, so, you know, and I'm really kind of a bit of a stability damage hound as well. Like, I like to knock mechs over, so that's quite fun. Anyway, I think I'll end it there. So next up we have got an actual mission. So I've now spoken for, I don't know, well over 2 hours. And we finally get some action now. So the next episode will be the first priority mission, which takes place on, I think it's a moon of Alloway. We're certainly in a lunar like surface. Anyway, it's a beautiful looking mission. It's got the Argo, which we're trying to liberate from these horrible pirates, but we'll talk about that in the next mission. So I'll leave it there and bid you all farewell. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you next time.